We are now going to simplify negative square roots. You will see this several times on your next test. You will need to do this for quadratic formula whenever you're finding your roots with imaginary roots solutions. First one we're going to work with is 36. I have created a list of all my perfect squares and their square root in front of them. I'm going to go first. I'm going to see that this is negative and realize there is no square root of negative 36. I can split this into the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 36. The square root of negative 1, as we talked about earlier, is I. Square root of 36, I'm going to find it on my table. 36, it's a perfect square. That is going to be 6. So it's I times 6. We typically write like a variable, like I is a variable, so we would say that this is 6I. The square root of negative 36 is 6I. Now we're going to do 100. Let's separate this. Square root of 100, and I'm going to put that square root of negative 1 at the end. That way at the end, that I will just stay at the end, like it is over here. Find 100. It's a perfect square. Turns into 10. Square root of negative 1, that's I. Proper way to write that is 10I. $108. Gonna need a calculator. First things first, let's say this is square root of 108 times the square root of negative 1. 108 would fall about here. So we can do 108, which is not a perfect square. Let's start about halfway. Let's try 64. That doesn't work. Divide it by what's next? 49. That does not work. 108 divided by 36. There we go. That's it. 36 is my perfect square. So we have the square root of 36 times the square root of 3 times the square root of negative 1. Square root of 36 is 6 times the square root of 3 times square root of negative 1, which is I. And we are going to write that as 6I, the square root of 3. Try the next one. This one has a number we're multiplying in front. We're just going to say 3 times the square root of 343 times, and let's just go ahead and give it that I. Take that negative out. 343, let's see where that falls. 343, let's divide it by, not a perfect square, let's go about halfway. Call it 169, see if that works. That does not. 343 divided by 144 shouldn't work. 343 divided by, let's try 121. Nope. 343 divided by 100 will not work. 81 shouldn't work. And what's next? 81, 64 doesn't work. 49. There we go. So we have 7 and 49. So we have 3 times the square root of 49 times the square root of 7, and we still have the I at the end. 3 times 7 times square root of 7 times I. These are the same. 3 times 7 is 21. Let's go ahead and move that I in front of the square root and finish off with that 7. Let's look at this negative square root of 75. 5, the square root of negative 75. 5 times the square root of 75 times the square root of negative 1. Square root of 75, 25 goes into there. We have the square root of 25 times the square root of 3, and square root of negative 1 is I. 5 times 5 times square root of 3 times I. 5 times 5 is 25. We have our I. We have the square root of 3. Next one, 2 times the square root of 363 times square root of negative 1. 363, probably going to need a calculator for this one. It is definitely not a perfect square. So 363 divided by halfway, let's go with 169 and see if that works. That does not. 169, 144. That doesn't work. Let's try 121. There it is, 121. We have 2 times the square root of 121 times 3 times, square root of 3, times our I. 2 times 11, square root of 121 is 11, times square root of 3 times I. 2 times 11 is 22. Get our I down there. And there's my square root I leave for my exact answer. This one should be pretty quick. 489 is easily recognizable as 7 squared, or sorry, square root of 49 is 7. So that would be 7, and then I'm going to need that I because it's negative. 4 times 7 is 28I. Just a little bit quicker than usual, going it that way. 4 square root of 128. That's interesting. It's not a negative, so I don't need to pull that I out. Don't get in the habit of doing that. Make sure you actually need to. 128, let's see which of these goes into it. 128, half of that would be about 64. That's probably it. Yes, it is. Square root of 64 times square root of 2. 4 times 8 times square root of 2. 32 square root of 2. Let's look at no more. Let's go ahead and call that done. I would suggest trying these two out on your own, seeing how well you do.